One of the penalties of refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. Plato. So that's important to me because I think it speaks a lot about the current state of the world that we live in. I think it's important for us to use our voice, use our platform, use our energy, because if you're not actively involved, then ultimately at the end of the day, someone else is going to be making the decisions for you. Doesn't matter if it's vehicles, doesn't matter if it's AI, doesn't matter if it's crypto, doesn't matter if it's guns or religion. It's pretty much the same case with everything. If you are not an active participant, then someone else is going to be laying the groundwork or laying the framework that you're going to have to live in. And of course, we live in a free country, but our free country still has rules. And thankfully, we have the Constitution to fall back on. But that's kind of one of the underlying things about my channel, about my why, my whole being is being a more active participant now than I've ever been because of what's on the line. And of course, all the things that we want to enjoy, all the things that we want to do are all at stake if we decide to sit on the sidelines. So I like to take an active role in perpetuating the greatness about the Second Amendment, about the United States, and about the Constitution in a variety of different ways. I've done it through airsoft, through video games, and obviously through firearms, and been getting more into the political scene, which is its own world into itself. And it's really kind of interesting to see how all those are kind of tied together. But for me, I've always been into it because obviously I love all those things, but if you don't engage in politics, then none of the other things matter, or all the other things that you love and care about will ultimately be affected. A little bit about me, U.S. Army veteran. I've always been interested in the military, always been interested in video games, and video games have been a huge influence on me for getting into firearms, getting into airsoft, getting into guns, and of course getting into military. Served at Fort Bragg twice, 82nd Airborne Division, 112 Signal Battalion, and then of course a station in Japan, which was awesome. So that was kind of something I wasn't sure I was going to do, but I always loved the military. And then one day I decided, I was young and I was like, if I'm going to do it, I should probably do it now. And I'm very thankful I did, because when I was younger, I was still trying to figure out who I was, what my direction was. And the military really gave me a foundation of confidence, a foundation of being able to just go out there, see the world, really experience, even though it's different from the civilian real world, it still is the real world. You're still, paying your own way. You're still living by your own means. And it's just a very interesting culture, and it's a secondary culture shock when you get out too. But basically, for me, it's just been a journey of going through the military, then getting out, and then kind of rediscovering civilian life and kind of bringing what my passions were with me all along the way. I started off playing airsoft before I joined the military, played airsoft when I was in the military, still play airsoft when I get out, and through that process also built bridges to the firearms community, because I think there's a lot of different communities will bash each other, different communities will try to separate themselves from each other, but I think all of them kind of serve the same purpose. To me, pop culture and video games, they're all tied together. They all, if done properly, serve the purpose of continuing this Second Amendment movement, this pro-American movement, which is the most important thing. I'm very passionate about politics now because that decides the way of life, our future, our freedom, First Amendment, Second Amendment, and all of other, our Bill of Rights and founding documents. So I think it's super important to pay attention to those, and we risk losing so much more by not paying attention to those. But those kind of came after, the political part came after my general interest in guns and the military. But as I've gotten older, those things have just become more and more entwined. And we are really living in a very interesting age where things can potentially become more free than they've ever been, or that we can basically on the verge of true tyranny where it might be impossible to ever get those things back. So that's why I think those are important. I really love military history, and I kind of love, again, that authenticity aspect. You'll see on my channels, I love to bring different things from pop culture and military history to life, different loadouts, different guns, different gear, different equipment. I'm not the smartest guy when it comes to everything because it's an endless pit of military history, depending on whether you're doing World War II or Vietnam or some like niche military from a foreign military and how they set up their equipment and everything. It's virtually endless, but I love to learn about those things. So that's kind of what I'm known for. I'm not like the greatest shooter in the world, but I love gear. I love learning how to become more efficient with different weapon systems. I worked for training companies, worked for gear development companies. So it's been a really cool journey going from someone who's a product of that whole culture that started off like the whole reinvigoration of the culture in the early 2000s, being a product of that, coming from airsoft, buying the products, getting to guns, then being a part of the industry, getting to contribute to that. And now kind of being an independent free agent, being on the end where now I'm working with all the other companies in the industry, being on the end where now I'm, I guess, influencing or bringing up the next generation. Like, to me, it's not so much influencing, it's more so bringing up the next generation, both instilling the values, the culture, but also like bringing my interests like the military history and the guns and gear along the way too. So, because everyone's always going to be interested in that, they're gonna come for the guns and gear, but they're gonna stay for the values and politics. Camera looking this way. I could either be in open ground or I can get behind a bush, but the open ground might have better lighting. I love film. I actually went to film school before I went to the military. Didn't finish film school, but I've always had a passion for film, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to get into it and consult on projects because, just being a military guy and a gun guy, I see those things that are very inaccurate. I see those things that just stick out to us, and you want them to do it right. And I know a lot of great friends that are consultants in the film and video game industry, but frankly, there's just not enough of us to go around, and that whole industry it has its own internal politics and ways of working around it where the things just fall through the cracks and things don't look authentic, and we always want things to look authentic. But always loved film. That was probably my first love, was like Star Wars and Jurassic Park and film in general. I mean, I really either wanted to be a paleontologist or I wanted to become a film director. Didn't end up becoming a paleontologist. Didn't quite end up becoming a director, but still ended up working with cameras and film, and I love storytelling. That's like one of my favorite things. So that's kind of how I got into this mess. Played one too many video games and played with one too many videoing software, and then of course ended up getting guns, and that's how I ended up here today. But that's pretty much about me. If an airsofter who is an American, who's borderline about almost voting age, was considering getting a gun, but maybe was on the fence, or maybe they never would, I guess I would tell them. There's a couple different angles to look at it, and it would also depend on what their reasons are for not getting a gun, would maybe kind of tailor my answer. But a couple of the ways I would approach that would be like, well, for one, if you are of voting age, it's like you are also, in my opinion, you're of the age where you should be able to exercise your constitutional rights, and any rights you don't exercise, you will ultimately lose. And also from just a basic perspective, looking at how things went down with COVID and like with hurricanes and natural disasters, we are living in an ever more uncertain world. You really want to not be the person that doesn't have the gun in a bad situation, whether it's robberies or whether it's natural disasters or civil war potentially. Look at any kind of like Last of Us or Walking Dead or whatever, even though there's like somewhat kind of made up. There's definitely situations there where you're like, man, you probably wish you had a gun. So that's kind of how I would approach it, like going to the bare bones, like just purely from a survival standpoint. It's better to have it and not need it. You can get it. Hopefully you train with it. But if you have it and you never use it, great. But if you have it, at least you have a tool that you can learn and use and train with. It's better to have some options than no options at all. My two biggest audiences are from the gun community and from the airsoft community. I always tell them, hey, if you're from the gun community, try airsoft. If you're from the airsoft community, try firearms, because I look at them all as part of the same piece of pie, or pie of gun ownership or of Second Amendment advocacy, because I feel like if you just do one thing, you're losing out on the other. So why not be well-rounded? Why not understand all aspects of gun ownership, from force on force to fundamentals, competition shooting, a little bit of everything. It just makes you a more prepared citizen. There's no point of being able to spec out and build the greatest gun and be an awesome shooter, but have no idea how to navigate terrain, or have no idea how to work with a team, or have no idea just some basic tactics of how rooms are designed and how you should kind of work angles. You know, people try to gatekeep and say that like civilians shouldn't know this, or like only infantry guys should know this, but I'm like, if you are a citizen, I mean, that's the reason why we had militias before. If you're a citizen, it probably would be better for the society if citizens knew this stuff, because then we can actually protect ourselves. We could actually uphold the Constitution and not be reliant on the government to do it. There's a lot of great quotes and a lot of great advice out there. One of the ones that I've liked over the years is like, you're the sum of the people you spend the most time with. I'm kind of an introvert, so I don't really spend my time with a lot of people, so I'm very selective. But, you know, if you spend your time with people who just waste their time all the time, then you will inevitably, you'll like feed off of that, and then you'll kind of become them. It's why like people who hang around drug dealers or around drugs end up becoming very addicted to drugs. But if you hang around successful people, even if you're not the smartest guy, you will inevitably become successful, or you will gain skills or knowledge from each one of those people. So I'd say who you spend your free time with is extremely important, probably more important than anything else in a lot of ways, because that'll shape who you are. So if you have bad friends, you will ultimately become like a unproductive person. But if you have productive friends, you will probably become a more highly contributing and more productive person in society, and dare I say, a more successful person in society. Your chances are just that much greater, just by proximity. So if I have advice for people, it's to just very carefully choose who you spend your time with, because that'll ultimately decide who you end up becoming.